What say you, Richard Alex Murdaugh? Are you guilty or not guilty of the felonies wherein you stand indicted?
Not guilty.
How shall you be tried?
By God and my country.
The exact time when Paul and Maggie Murdaugh were murdered.
At the end of the investigation, it was obvious.
I'm not here to work with them, okay?
And the whole point is to have this not fall into the wrong hands. This case is unique, it's unprecedented in South Carolina history.
On the line, caller from 4147 Moselle Road. He's advising that his wife and child was shot. Mr. Murdaugh, go ahead and call the caller, please. It's 4147 Moselle Road. I've been up to it now. It's bad.
How did they shoot? Did they shoot themselves?
Oh, no. Hell no.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
Are they in a vehicle?
No, ma'am. They're on the ground out at my kennel.
Welcome back to Unsolved South Carolina, the Murdaugh Murder, Money, and Mystery. This is our daily podcast that breaks down everything that's happening in Alex Murdaugh's double murder trial. Right now, we are looking at that, or just heard the first pieces of evidence of what happened the night of the double murders. Not only the 911 call that you just heard, but also the body camera video, the evidence, the body-worn camera that the first responders had, what they were wearing. With me, I have our legal analyst, the South Carolina former Attorney General Charlie Condon. With us, executive producer Drew Tripp, and manning the controls is Max Harrison, our chief photographer at WCIV Channel 4. And I want to kick it off a little bit because the body camera video, the 911 call, we're starting to hear details and see, or the jurors are starting to see video that have not been disclosed before, and we're seeing reactions to that. Charlie, tell me what you thought about the way they started rolling out this body camera video. Did you see anything in the courtroom about the expressions? What were you saying?
I was so fascinated by the by the way, this is day 4, right, for us.
That's right.
But it seems like maybe longer than 4 days.
Right,
but this is really the first day of evidence where jurors are actually seeing evidence that they can consider relative to the guilt or innocence. I shouldn't say innocence, guilty or not guilty. There's a legal distinction there, by the way, of this defendant. And I was really curious. We knew that the body camera footage was coming. And I was really very curious as to how the state was going to handle what I would have thought would be very gruesome details. And before Attorney General, it was the chief prosecutor of the circuit system in the Ninth Circuit, and I had the occasion to prosecute lots of grisly cases, and I had one case in particular that was reversed. It was a capital case, reversed State versus Middleton, based upon the introductions by yours truly of too gruesome a photograph, so to speak. So it's a little bit of a standard in South Carolina as to what you can't do. And I was thinking, how are they going to handle that? Because I'm assuming that lots of crime scene photos, detail-wise, that would be too shocking to show to anybody, because no need to talk too graphically about this, but his brain was blown out of his head of Paul Murdaugh. We know that. But it turned out really well, apparently under our standards, because we couldn't see it directly because they made a point of privacy to make sure people couldn't see it, but the jurors could see it. So I'm assuming that and they were moved by it. It was just, you could tell it was disturbing to them, but you could also tell that it was not such where they would turn their eyes away.
Right.
And I'm assuming it met the standard, so it made the point of what happened there, how serious it was, but it didn't cross the line, and so the defense didn't object to it.
Right.
But it was a moment in that courtroom. There were several jurors that were obviously very, very disturbed by what they saw.
And you were in a different part of the courtroom than I was. I was sort of behind the prosecution, but I had a really clear kind of sideline of it. You had more of that front on, but I could also see sort of what was going on with the family. So we were both kind of seeing it from different perspectives. I saw the same thing with the jurors. I actually saw one woman who actually put her hand up to her mouth, kind of aghast, it felt like, when she saw that with Paul's body, because the gaping head wound, they also described it in a way that you couldn't forget. It was they talked about how his basically his brain had been disconnected from his head, and it's something it's hard to believe, and we are actually not going to see that. Just as a point, that is sealed. Some of the most grisly crime scene evidence in this has actually been sealed to protect the family. And that brings me to the other part where they were covering up the monitors on the defense side. And I don't know if it was for Alec or if it was because he was visibly shaken. He was literally crying at several times, especially during that 911 call. I heard tear or crying from him when they were talking about the how brutal it was. And he started crying again, and they were keeping it covered up with like a cardboard. Right,
yeah. It was really old school. It had pieces of white paper and Scotch tape over the monitors.
It was very old school, yeah.
Yeah, so it was in effect blocked. Although if you really stared hard, as really I did, you really couldn't see much, but you could see that there were things that were on there that the jurors were seeing.
Yeah, exactly. And so I noticed that the family, though, was a little bit more stoic.
Well said. I thought that was, we were missing the brother, right? Randy didn't show.
We didn't see Randy. We saw John Marvin was there with his wife, Liz. Lynn, the sister of Alex Murdaugh, was there, and his only living son, Buster, was there. And it was interesting. You caught a bit of a moment between the defense and Buster.
Yeah, there was that moment, and it was in the middle of someone's, I believe it was the direct examination by the state, and defense attorney Hart Putlian walked over and had to get permission from the security guard there to have access to Buster. By the way, every time I hear Buster, I think of that would be, I guess, his great-grandfather. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yeah, and so, by the way,
that's exactly what it would be. So that was just one of the solicitors. There were three named solicitors that were Murdaughs over the years, three generations of these
right, and
Murdaughs.
Buster's the one I knew. He was the one that he was really the sort of the dean of prosecutors when I was coming up through the prosecution ranks, and he was the one that chewed tobacco regularly and had a styrofoam cup that he typically would spit into. Anyhow, getting back to Buster, I think he's really a tragic figure in all this, wouldn't you say? I mean, he's there in court, and his brother's dead, his mother's dead, and his dad's on trial for double murder. But the point of all that, though, he's obviously actively being involved with his father's defense because he was consulting with the defense attorney. Yeah,
that's really, and that was quite a moment to see that, because until that happened, did we really know that? Or did we just think that maybe they were there to watch the proceedings? But when the defense attorney actually walks out and around the security and speaks to Buster in the middle of testimony, that was a moment. Drew, as far as when you were in there, did you pick up on sort of the vibe of what was happening today? Was it different, or did it feel like we're kind of settling into a trial here?
Settling in the sense that it is a labor. You are paying attention. It's like a classroom setting almost, and I don't know how to convey that to anyone who's not been in a trial. Any better way to convey that? But you're in a class and you've got to pass, and you've got to really buckle down and pay attention, and that's what's happening to you all day in these trials. And there are times you zone out. There are times that you're really invested. But if even me being a reporter, and I'm trying to go along and do my best to give synopses, blow by blow information about what happened, I find myself, some of it I can anticipate when I know, they bring a witness on the stand and he's going to talk about their background, yada, yada, yada. I can zone out for a minute. Sometimes it's really hard for me as an observer, reporter, to stay invested in it too. And there are other times it's coming so fast and furious that I can't turn away.
Right. Yeah.
If I know if I turn away, I'm going to miss something.
Yes. Yeah. That's it. Well said.
Well, and that speaks to one other thing before we get into some of the clips. So there was one other thing that I noticed was that they're still figuring out like how to broadcast, use the technology, deal with the body-worn cameras, the 911 calls, the way the lawyers speak. Just trying to hear everything that's going on in that courtroom can be challenging. And you made the point that, gosh, you hope that the jurors can hear what's going on.
Yeah. Now, I'm trying to watch this and be as impartial and as objective as I can be, and I promise to keep doing that. But I couldn't help but notice of course, this is a stage case. They're starting to your point, Drew, I think we're settling into a good old South Carolina murder case. It did seem a lot of normalcy with that. But they start off with the strongest piece of evidence, which I do think is this body cam, which ties him time-wise in a really bad way. I think they've got a problem on the defense side. But just being in there, Prosecutor Waters, he had the pace. He had the courtroom voice. He had the leadership. He was there. And I'm not here to criticize anyone relative to their presentation. I don't know what their strategies or their themes, but I would note that the jurors were looking at him. He had the leadership.
Well, he spoke up today, for sure.
Yeah, and it was loud.
He found his voice.
And it was... And so you could understand him.
Actually, it got my attention a couple times.
And I will add there to that point with Creighton. You attend enough trials, you watch enough trials, you see what happens and what the defense strategy, what the defense's primary strategy is, and it boils down to reasonable doubt, right? They're trying to inject reasonable doubt. So it's incumbent upon that prosecutor, and this is why they call it redirect. After the defense has had their cross-examination and has gone down all sorts of rabbit trails and introduced all sorts of speculation and what ifs and tried to introduce that doubt, it is absolutely crucial for that prosecutor to come back on the other side and redirect and get back on track. And I thought Creighton Waters today did a terrific job of that.
Right. And defense, to their credit, they were pointing out a lot of potential issues, inconsistencies, or missteps by law enforcement. And so there are things there that I'm thinking they'll develop that either if they put on a case or through further cross-examinations of state's witnesses.
Well, let's listen to a clip where we actually hear the Captain Jason Chapman from the Colleton County Sheriff's Office. He was one of the first responders, and he has years of experience within criminal investigations for Colleton County. And he gets up there and is one of the first responders, and he has to call the sheriff. And this is about what he tells the sheriff, what he's come upon the scene, and what he thinks they need to do about it.
I had a brief conversation with Sheriff Hill by telephone while en route. He had been advised of the caller's identity as Mr. Alex Murdaugh. With my career, I'm familiar with the Murdaugh family and Mr. Murdaugh. And Sheriff Hill advised me that if it was in fact confirmed to be Mr. Murdaugh, that he would likely notify SLED simply because of the conflict of interest with the family. And shortly before we arrived, I believe he was able to confirm that. And that call was made to request for assistance from SLED and to request that they actually assume primary the body.
Yeah.
That's huge. To have SLED called because there's a conflict of interest.
To me, that was a moment. Just 46 counties in South Carolina. We have 46 elected sheriffs. Typically in South Carolina, in rural South Carolina, the sheriff really is the person. I mean, he runs lots of things. In the more urban counties, there are bigger police departments and such. I imagine the city of Walterboro has their own police department. Of course they do, and I don't know if any other municipalities do. But to have the sheriff of the county on the day he gets called and say, oh, I can't touch this one because of X, Y, and Z hasn't been articulated. Let's call in SLED right away. Right. That, to me, was a moment. Yeah,
I mean, and the conflict of interest is partly because we are in such a rural, small town area, and you've got the same name, the Murdaugh name, not only working so many cases within the solicitor's office, so many cases working on personal injury cases, and that is going to include, you're going to be talking to the courts, you're going to be talking to all the law enforcement who worked wrecks, who worked crashes. They knew everybody.
Yeah.
And you get that feeling. Now, the prosecution was really trying to explain how before SLED gets there, they needed to preserve this crime scene.
If I could speak to that, I was really impressed with that. They feel like they have a conflict, and they're calling in the state law enforcement or state police, state law enforcement division, and the sheriff makes that call. But they also do all they could do and really should have done, but they did it like right away. They sent their top, and I was very impressed with his expertise and his testimony on what he did in preserving that crime scene right from the get-go. So the crime scene's out really in the middle of nowhere, to my way of thinking, I guess being from urban Charleston, but here they get right out there and looked to me like they did a really, really good job of preserving that crime scene. Now, having said that, the defense did pick holes at it.
Right.
But I would characterize that as they threw punches but no body blows.
Yeah, and, I think that's a really interesting way to put it, because I feel like we are kind of trying to win the war, not just the battles. And how were you thinking, Drew, when we were listening to some of this crime scene evidence roll through? What were some of the things that stuck out to you, good or bad or ugly, on either side, on the prosecution versus the defense?
I can rattle off the top of my head the pieces of evidence we heard about today that really, really stood out to me. Number one, big puddle of water around Paul Murdaugh's body.
Mm-hmm.
Big puddle of water, and later throughout the day we heard additional testimony about that. And I'm going to foreshadow something here I'll talk about at the end briefly, because it coincides with the end of the trial proceedings today, and a little bit of fireworks there at the very end. Mm-hmm. But that puddle of water, the chicken. They talked about a dead chicken in the in as part of the evidence. They located a dead chicken in the kennels. We heard in pretrial talking about testimony about, or no, I'm sorry. We heard in pretrial about a video where it's on Paul's phone, and in the background on that video, Maggie and Alec are supposedly talking about a dead chicken. Mm-hmm. The dead chicken being on video and Alec being at the kennels talking about the dead chicken sort of works as a timeline, does it not?
Yeah.
It approves something. The 911 call, we already heard a little bit of that. We had received that previously, but we learned today what we received was heavily redacted, right, because there was a lot of information that Alec was giving in that 911 call that we didn't get when that recording was originally released. He talked about what had happened, and that was the first time we hear Alec allude to the boat crash. Mm-hmm. And he starts painting that picture
right off the bat.
It wasn't as soon as it was. And now that's another thing. We heard that now in the body camera video, which we didn't see. We only heard the audio of the body camera. In the body camera with the first responding officer, Alec was talking about that boat crash and that having something to do with it. He was talking about that right away. But it took him a few minutes in the 911 call, but still,
he got it in there.
Yeah.
Yes.
He got it in there, and they said, who's threatening? And he said, I don't know who the threats are coming, but my son knows. And you're like, your son? That's your son that's been wounded? And he goes, no, my other son, which would presumably be Buster that he's talking about, who's sitting in court. Mm-hmm. So will Buster be able to talk to these threats that Paul was facing, and will that be relevant to the defense's argument? I thought that was interesting too. I wanted to also talk about the defense spent a lot of time poking holes in what was going on with the state's preserving of the crime scene evidence. They really went after a couple of the investigators, saying, hey, hold on, I don't know if you needed to be doing that kind of work. They talked about how they didn't use booties for their feet. They didn't, when they were walking around, that there were tire tracks that we don't know whose tire tracks, because a huge summer storm approached and a lot of this evidence got washed away. But not just that. The defense was trying to say that it had been somehow this evidence was going to be all messed up because people have been driving and walking all over the place.
Yes.
What is
CSI effect? I mean,
so tell me what the CSI effect is.
It's just really well known among criminal defense attorneys, which, I practice criminal defense now. And through the media, and you watch these television shows where the prosecution lasts, 20 minutes and the police investigation lasts 20 minutes, and you see all this whiz-bang technology and fingerprints and you name it out there. People who watch these shows and really don't know better think that in every criminal case that's to be done and to be expected from the get-go. And if you don't have that, the police have not done their jobs and there's a reasonable doubt as to who committed any crime. And so I think it's really typical and really effective, and we'll see how effective it is in this case, to start poking holes in what they could have done better. And anytime you have a crime scene being developed by anyone, there's always going to be something. And so when you got that witness on the stand, you can magnify the mistake to make it look like it's very, very crucial. And so whether that's going to sway a juror or two or all of them, we'll have to wait and see. But that's clearly the strategy. I
think one of the most effective moments. Oh, I'm sorry, Drew. Go ahead. You were going to say something?
I was just going to mention two pieces of evidence in that the defense really spent a lot of time on, almost getting down to the granular detail, and not almost, they did, because they were specifically referencing microscopic evidence.
Right.
But two pieces of evidence. We heard about bloody boot prints in the feed room of the dog kennel, and we also later heard about tire tracks leading away that did not match the path of Alex's vehicle or any other vehicle currently on the property. They spent a lot of time agonizing over those, especially the tire tracks later in the day after the two of you had left court.
Well, and I want to get. We're circling back to that. Don't go away, because before we go, I just want to play a clip from Dick Harpootlian. Dick Harpootlian, of course, is Alex Murdaugh's one of his defense attorneys, and in it, he is cross-examining Captain McDowell, who is on the scene. He is a first responder. His job is to get there and preserve what he can, but we know SLED's coming. So right there, Harpootlian is trying to poke some holes in what he's doing and why is he not just waiting for the cavalry to come in.
Oh, yeah. And that, again, it can work really well because we're in a day and age now where people do watch these shows, and it is impressive what can be done in a particular case. It really is amazing, really. DNA, that's all, relatively new from a prosecution and defense standpoint. So whether these jurors think there are mistakes that are made that are critical, such to create reasonable doubt. But having said that, we've just got some hard and fast evidence, don't we, here, that the defense hasn't even attempted to explain at this point.
Well, let's hear this. Let's hear this clip real quick from Harpootlian and see what he says.
I don't know what your role was there.
I was a first responder.
Well, they were dead, Paul and Maggie. Could you have rendered them aid? Were they in a physical condition where your assistance would have helped?
No, sir.
They were dead.
So he's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, at some point, do you remember at one point that I think you may have asked both of those officers, you didn't know what you were doing, or words to that effect. And that's a bit of a double-edged sword. You're making a point there, but it can be construed by perhaps some jurors as being really, really rude and unfair to somebody who's just there doing the best they can and really on the spur of the moment with a shocking crime scene did some things that were really beyond reproach. So we'll see how that goes.
I mean, there's so many layers to that you could dig into, Charlie. But let's ask ourselves, why and it's not just this case. It's many, 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 many cases. If you're familiar with Colleton County at all, if you follow them as we do, Colleton County is part of the Charleston coverage area for television news. We don't cover them as much as we should, but we cover them as much as we can. very often, SLED is called in to participate and help with Colleton County investigation. Sometimes lead Colleton County investigation. It's because Colleton doesn't have the resources that a lot of these larger departments have.
Yeah. Isn't there a field office here?
Yes, there is.
Walterboro?
There was a field office established in Walterboro about a decade ago, maybe a little more ago, because there was a flurry of gang activity here back then. The Cowboys gang, in fact, that has been somewhat alluded to having ties to Alex Murdaugh. We'll get into that later in the trial, I'm sure. But that SLED even established a field office here a long time ago. So it's very common for Colleton to ask SLED to come in and help because they simply don't have the resources to do things that they need to do. And the other side of that sword, as you're saying, is they've got the guys they do have, the men and women they do have, they've got to do a lot. Yes. They've got to know how to do a lot, and they've got to know how to take care of a crime scene. They've got to know how to get in there and handle things that maybe a Charleston County, maybe a Greenville County would have more people to come in and immediately respond to, and they just don't. And are you going to sacrifice the police work for good police work for not having somebody who's technically a specialist in crime scene preservation? And that's not really a fair ask of Colleton County. If I'm a member of the jury who knows anything about my county, listening to Dick Harpootlian say that. So.
Well, the only thing I feel like we got to mention, because it happened right after we walked out, so I could do a live shot with Charlie. Something about tell me about what happened in there. Maybe you were still there.
I was actually there, and I actually had to ask somebody who was beside me, did you hear the same thing I heard? And it was just thrown out there. Paul's truck, whatever it was,
were
so
you
stunning.
In there by then, Drew?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's stolen and gone to Hampton County, which is obviously nearby. Tell us about it.
So toward the end, we hear from the prosecution that in questioning Captain Chapman, they ask him about, they've been all afternoon, they've been hammering on these other tire tracks, the tire tracks they couldn't match to any other vehicle there. That led away in a different direction. So they finally figure it out, and Chapman notes that they start asking him about these tire tracks, and Alex Murdaugh's demeanor immediately changes. Like he's been upset. Chapman has repeatedly described him as genuinely, legitimately upset. And Chapman says the moment they start really digging into these tire tracks that can't be explained, Alex's demeanor changes, and he starts watching them out of the corner of his eye, and he's paying attention to what they're doing, and he's calmer, and he's more measured in how he speaks to them. So they finally narrow down, well, Alec, is there any vehicle? How did Paul and Maggie get down here to the kennels to begin with? Are there any vehicles here, not here, that should be here? And Alex was like, oh, yeah, you know what? Paul's truck is missing.
What?
What? Y'all can't see me on camera, but
what?
There's a missing truck, and
Why do you think they didn't reference that in an opening statement?
I don't know. I think they're probably, I don't know,
holding back some stuff, right?
Yeah, but I can't speak to that. You're a prosecutor. You've strategized.
Yeah, I'm thinking, and I did hear from a reliable source, just us talking, that they have a lot more, because I thought the opening statement was effective, and I heard from somebody who I think knows what they're talking about. There's a lot more. Yeah.
So with the truck, Paul's truck is missing. They don't find it until the next morning. It's on the side of the road off of Highway 60, South Carolina Highway 63, which if you're trying to get to Moselle from Hampton, Walterboro, Bamberg, not maybe Bamberg, but not that way, but Walterboro, Hampton, you're almost guaranteed to be taking either Highway 64 or 63 to get to Moselle. And it's not a convenient drive from anywhere. 63 is very close to Moselle Road. And they found Paul's truck parked along the side of Highway 63 the next morning. The other thing happened at the very end, circling back to the pool of water, the big, the anachronistic pool of water that didn't seem to make sense. They couldn't find the source for it. It hadn't rained that much. Where did that water come from? In theory, you could say this was out at a dog kennel. If you ever kept dogs, you ever kennel dogs, especially hunting dogs, which I'm assuming a lot of these were bird dogs, retrievers, labs. you're going to kennel dogs, you're going to have to go clean those kennels every single day because there's going to be, you got to go clean them,
right.
And that can explain away the water. However, there didn't appear to be, as Jason Chapman noted, there didn't appear to be a source for the water and where it was coming from. And right at the end, the state in redirect after the prosecution had gone in on Chapman for a while, the state in redirect mentioned how it appeared to them there was some discoloration in that water. And as soon as they mentioned it, Dick Harpootlian, I'd noted earlier, I think before we started, I had a little trouble hearing Dick when I went into the courtroom today.
Yeah, to my point, I thought the leadership was with the state, right? I mean,
and then he jumped up and said, "Hold on."
When I went into that courtroom in the late afternoon session, I was in the first row of the second set of pews. So about, as you know, walking steps, I was probably about 15 steps behind where Dick was standing when I started, and I was having trouble hearing. We took a brief stretch break. I walked to the very back of the courtroom. I had no trouble hearing Dick at the very back of the courtroom when he got up and objected to the state's trying to introduce evidence related to discoloration in that water. And what they were trying to get Chapman to say is, did it look like blood to you in the water? And does it look like, more specifically, did it look like streaks of blood as if some blood had been washed away? And Dick objected and got it tossed out because Chapman is not an evidence on bloodstains or anything like that. And he got it stricken.
Right. But the bell had been rung, right? The jurors heard it, right?
Yes, they had. And what's going to be interesting is when the state tries to bring that back with an actual blood expert.
Oh, boy.
But it's out there.
Drew, so do you have any idea of who's coming up first tomorrow? Did you hear before you got out of there? Because we had to go. We had to get out to do live shots. So I'm wondering if we got
I didn't get a sense, but I would bet that it would go by the list of jurors that has been produced or released to the public. Yes, I'm so sorry. Not the list of jurors. Good Lord, I would get in a lot of trouble for publishing that. But the list of the witnesses, the list of witnesses that has been released to the public. That I believe that would be probably close. So far they've followed it. So I've got that pulled up actually right in front of me. They made it through several of the first named individuals here today. It's looking like we've got a few SLED agents and a few Colleton County Sheriff's Office agents near the top of the list.
Crime scene.
And one I'm seeing is the name Laura Rutland, who Jason Chapman, he referenced her as his co-detective.
Okay.
I'm seeing her near the top of the list. So maybe we'll see them.
We should be seeing them. The SLED agents have been sitting in front of us this whole time. So we should be hearing from the crime scene as they kind of got through that. And we're going to hear more about just the immediate aftermath of the double murder. There's a lot to unpack tomorrow, too. And tomorrow's Friday. So this is not a sequestered jury. They're going to get to go home, take a break, as we all will, for a weekend, and then we'll be back on Monday. But you'll see us here tomorrow for Friday for that final week wrap-up. Please stay with us, and also be sure to follow us on abcnews4.com and all of our social media. And anywhere you find podcasts, you're going to find Unsolved South Carolina. Before I go, I have to tell you, if you like this podcast, be sure to check out Unsolved South Carolina, Finding Brittany Drexel. A new episode dropped today.
Yeah, we got a lot of irons in the fire.
But it's in the same franchise, totally different story. If you've been following the Brittany Drexel story, please take it a listen, and I think you'll like it. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
Until tomorrow.